Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today, everything is for sale. Prices, references, and names in the description. Prices when available, but reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for instant price quotes as well as updates on condition, accessories, and terms. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy and to sell. Sell me your watch. We're buying single watches or entire collections with no upper limit on value. We're stocking up for the holidays, and I want you to supply me. Once again, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to sell or buy a watch. Let's jump straight in. New for 2020, an entirely new family of watches from H. Moser & C. of Schaffhausen. We first saw the Moser Streamliner flyback chronograph, followed by the even more charismatic matrix green Moser Streamliner center seconds. Now, this is a full integrated bracelet sports watch inspired by the streamlined locomotives of the first half of the 20th century, the Milwaukee Road Hiawatha, the Pennsylvania Railroad S1 and T1, and this is very much in that vein. So while it is an integrated sports watch of bracelet, case, and lug, just like a Nautilus or a Royal Oak, it looks nothing like them, instead referencing vintage locomotives as well as some 1970s watch design, and to good effect. 40 millimeters in stainless steel by 12 millimeters thick, it is a true sports watch, fully loomed, automatic winding with a 3-day power reserve, and 120 meters water resistant with a screw-down crown. It could absolutely be a formal watch, and its elegant lines and no-date dial lend it rather well to that purpose, but this is the kind of watch you never need to take off. As you can see, the bracelet is gorgeous with a combination of satin finished and polished facets, and you can see just how tight the tolerances are. The detailing is outstanding with a transitional bevel that runs off the edge of the case and the lugs and then down the individual shoulders. Taking a quick look at the underside, you'll note that Moser, though new to bracelets, is doing it right with gaps to avoid pinching skin or pulling hair. There's a twin trigger double folding clasp, and I happen to approve as the twin trigger arrangement is the most secure. Rolling back to the case, you can see that there is polishing within the individual links, so the degree of attention to detail is surpassing. Moser, famous for its evacuated case flanks, and while you see it on the Venturer, the Pioneer, and the Endeavor, here it's a completely different take, creating a layered case aesthetic. On the top of the bezel, you can see a radial satin grain, much like the lapping machine pattern laid down on many iconic 70s tonneau case sports watches. A lovely and highly angular edge, this double knurled crown, making it easy to grip, and then a dial of matrix green, starting with a sort of toxic green at center and fading to almost black at its edge. Note the applique polished indices. Also note that the individual indices echo the form of the extended ceramic luminescent material called Globalite, which is placed on top of both of the mirror polished hands, giving them 3 dimensions and also tremendous luminous effect at night. The time machine, and I will call it a time machine, is powered by Moser's own HMC 200. As you can see, free sprung with a full balance bridge. This is a shock-resistant sports watch movement. Automatic winding, 3-day power reserve, stop seconds, 21.6 beat rate. You can see that it features Moser's distinctive double-crested Côte de Genève, as well as black polished screws and a lovely satin spiral finished and also media blasted double finished rotor. A gorgeous watch that wears well at 40 millimeters and only 12 millimeters thick. It's actually thinner than a Rolex Daytona. This is a sports watch that does it all. Now, if you want a Moser, but you want something different, well, nothing encapsulates Moser's sense of humor, and that is corporate-wide. Quite like the Swiss Alp watch, originally launched in 2016 as a bit of a send-up of the famous smartwatch. This timepiece is the Swiss Alp watch ZZZZ, the ZZ, also known as the standby model, with an absolutely unadorned dial, no branding, no origin statement, simply black. It's designed to evoke the smartwatch in its standby mode, hence ZZ, it is sleeping. The case is white gold, and as you can see, 38.5 millimeters across by 10.6 millimeters thick, 51.5 millimeters lug to lug. The watch wears compact, flat, broad, and fairly elegant on the wrist, as it takes the best of Silicon Valley and Schaffhausen and combines them. It's a formidable aesthetic statement, and I love the use of ultra-classical leaf hands on this dial. The contrast level is high, which is not a given for polished hands on a black dial, but it's easy to read at a glance, and the timepiece is equipped with not just a manufacture movement, but a properly shaped and sized movement. HMC 324 manual wind, 18,000 vibrations per hour, 4-day power reserve. You can see there's a case-back power reserve indicator complication, and then a free-sprung balance with a full bridge for shock tolerance, just as we saw on the Streamliner, but with the addition of a Straumann alloy overcoil hairspring. The balance, the hairspring, the escapement, all made by Moser, and as you can see, lovely double-crested Côte de Genève, perfectly aligned across the bridges. A truly gorgeous watch, and I should also mention that the quadruple Z was a 20-piece limited edition, so exclusivity is assured. The strap is gator on the top and a lovely suede material on the bottom, with a small white gold pin buckle to match for easy adjustment on the fly. Absolutely sensational. Both watches characteristic of Moser and indicative of why this company, which builds 1,500 watches a year, is so different from the rest of Swiss horology. A sense of humor and self-awareness. Now, speaking of a company that is self-aware, Patek Philippe knows how good it is, but it is committed to improvements, and for 2019, the Patek Philippe Nautilus gained a new movement. The new caliber 26330 SC, as before, same power reserve, free-sprung architecture, and silicone hairspring as the 324, but for the first time in the history of the Patek Philippe Nautilus, we have a Patek Philippe Nautilus caliber that can do this. Hacking or stop seconds. This was the innovation of the 26330. The rest of the watch need not change that much, as Patek pretty much got it right back in 1976 with the Gerald Genta original, and then in 2006 with the launch of the 5711. The timepiece, as ever, 40 millimeters, 8.6 millimeters thick, and about 44.5 millimeters lug to lug, so it wears beautifully on a wrist. Very comfortable, handsomely sculpted, handsomely detailed, and one of my favorite details, this was actually only introduced with the 5711, it's the blue gradient dial that fades from silver blue at its center to almost black or navy blue at its edge. The faceting of the case, the details of the satin and the polish, the curves and the creases, all exquisite, and with 120 meters of water resistance, full lume, and automatic winding, this is an out-and-out sports watch. Flip it over and you can see the new movement, much like the old one, is uncompromised in its finish, though somewhat more sophisticated in its engineering. Beaten away at 4 Hertz, free sprung, adjusted in 6 positions, anti-magnetic, and guaranteed from the factory to run no worse than -3 plus 2 seconds per day. This is the new movement inside an old favorite. Let's do a lume shot. And that right there is the 5711, which I always like to say is better loomed than it's ever given credit for. And right here you can see the Globalite hands, that ceramic luminescent material on the Moser Streamliner. Okay, we're going to jump around a little bit here and talk about an Omega that, frankly, is hugely underrated. This watch launched at Basel 2015, but deliveries were slow due to the need to ramp up the factory building the caliber 8900 inside the Constellation Globemaster. But this watch was worth the wait. 39 millimeters with steel case and tungsten bezel. There will be tantalum in the show, but not yet. This is a timepiece that represents the modern-day reincarnation of the Paipan constellation. If you remember the original early 1950s observatory chronometer constellation with the Paipan faceted and sloping dial, that comes back to life on this Connie, which is the Connie Omega purists wanted. Though the Griffin Claw watch, also known as the Manhattan, has been very popular in Eastern markets, traditional Western markets had always demanded a return of the Paipan constellation, and for the sake of nostalgia, it arrived in 2015. Now, this watch has a 60-hour power reserve, plenty of lume, 100-meter water resistance, and integration of bracelets. So this is a sports watch, in spite of the fact that it is absolutely satisfying in the dress watch paradigm. There's nothing about this watch lacking in elegance. The case is compact, only 46.5 millimeters from lug to lug, and 13 millimeters thick. The dial is a lovely silver satin white, and you can see the faceting of the individual planes for each hour, but also the slope off to the side. Blackened hands, indices, and Omega marquee for high contrast, and then you flip it over and you can see the image of the observatory, reminding you that though this is a master chronometer in the modern era, historically the Connie was an observatory chronometer. 60-hour power reserve, coaxial escapement, METAS, which is COSC standard but goes beyond, as you have a fully cased up test of the watch. COSC is a bare movement, so this is a 6-position chronometry test to the ISO 3159 that defines the COSC, but it's also a power reserve, winding efficiency, shock resistant, anti-magnetism, and water resistance test. A master chronometer tests the whole watch. Subsidiary setting features, you better believe it. Stop seconds, But if you are a frequent traveler, it helps to have an hour hand that you can move independently. Note how the watch continues to tick and keep time. You just change your time zone. It's that easy. The watch is handsome, comfortable, and thanks to many individual removable links on both sides of the clasp, it's really easy to size this one down. A gorgeous option from Omega and a perennially underrated watch in an era when seemingly every steel Rolex is trading over list pre-owned. Let's talk about a watch that you can buy from a high horology brand that gives you tremendous functionality. Whether you're a traveler or simply have friends and family in far-flung locations, nothing quite satisfies like a hybrid world time, dual time, and that's what the Jaeger-LeCoultre Geographic complication has always been. This is the Master Compressor Geographic from the 2000s. 41.5 millimeters in stainless steel. It's 100 meters water resistant with the brilliant compressor crown system. So white, you're tight, and as I like to say, red, you're dead. It's a color-coded system, and because it only compresses and decompresses the seals, it doesn't thread through the seal, so it doesn't wear the seal. It is a brilliant system, intuitive, color-coded, and very easy to use if your hands are wet, sweaty, or gloved. Now on the dial side of this watch, we'll get a little bit closer, you can see that we have a reference ring down at 6 o'clock. This is much like a world time, but take care to note the second time zone with its AM-PM distinction. As I travel, I can change my reference time, or if I simply want to scope out the time in different cities where I may have friends or family or business associates, I can easily do so by rotating the reference ring, and you can see it rotates in both directions, and the second time zone does the math for me. Take note of the AM-PM. See how it jumps just like that? So I know, for example, whether I'm looking at day or night in the city of reference, and I have 24 reference cities for 24 principal time zones. There's a radial date. All of this is automatic winding and goes through the Master 1000 hours control. The Master 1000 hours control is exhaustive and exacting, and it was introduced in 1992 as one of the first factory in-house tests that went beyond the requirements of the COSC. And the Master Compressor series features these lovely solid rose gold 18-karat medallions in the case back, signifying that the watch has been through the Master 1000 hours control. Remember, COSC is just 2 weeks of testing. Accurate to -1 plus 6 seconds from the factory with 100 meters of water resistance. This is a true sports watch and has a glorious bracelet. Now, the bracelet is a combination of satin and polish with 2 micro adjustments built in, a little bit like Rolex Easy Link. You can see how there is a socket that eventually doubles up over the hinge bar, and so you have that micro adjustment on both sides, allowing you to fine-tune the fit without removing or adding links. Now throw it on the wrist, and at 41.5, it's a large watch, but it's not a huge watch. I've owned this case size and enjoyed it considerably. It's a great looking timepiece with the addition of the bracelet made by JLC, as with the rest of the watch. The value proposition here is enormous, and as you can see, there are some elements on the dial that recall the Polaris 68, so it even nods and winks at Jaeger-LeCoultre's own history. Let's do a quick loom shot here because this watch deserves it. There you go, right there, plenty of lume, a true sports watch. Let's bring in another candidate. I'm guessing you're probably not going to call this one without seeing it by day, but if you called the shot, congratulations, because this is an exotic. Previewed in 2017 with a platinum enamel limited edition, this is the stainless steel Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra Worldtimer, 43 millimeters in stainless steel. It's the Aqua Terra Surf Turf Seamaster, the one that's equally adept on or off the land. And you can see you get the teak deck dial of the standard Aqua Terra, but broader and arced around the center dial. You can see it's a blue metallic, dark blue metallic for the teak deck portions. There are applique indices. At center, a laser-ablated and oxidized titanium projection of the world. And then outboard, you can see that there are staggered cities representing the principal time zones, with the Parisian time zone being replaced by Bienne, also known as Biel, which is the home city of Omega. Now to set this watch, you screw out the crown. Everything here is sporting style. It's 150 meters water resistant, automatic winding, fully loomed as you just saw. Now I have the ability to change my local time zone. You can see the watch continues to tick. As with the Constellation, you have this mobile hour hand that's great when you are changing your time zone. There is a date, and then of course everything moves in sync, and you activate stop seconds by pulling the crown to its extremity, its second outboard position. And note that the bifurcated reference ring inboard rotates. So this is quite simple. What you do if you want to know the time in any of the 24 time zones, you simply look at your reference city, for example Moscow, and you can see, oh, I can see that it is, for example, 3 p.m. So it's 3 p.m. and it's still day because we are in the silver rather than the dark blue portion of the reference ring. You use the broad arrow minute hand as your reference for both the reference city as well as the local hour. So they share a minute hand. Also important to note, there's a slightly off-white lume used here. So though it's not noticeable at first glance, the lume is not pure white. It's not supposed to be fauxtina either, but it's supposed to be a slightly off-white cream color to add some warmth to the dial, and that it does quite effectively. You simply look next to any of your reference cities, and you can see, for example, Rio de Janeiro, it is 9 a.m. Meanwhile, in Alaska, you can see that it is 3 a.m., and 3 a.m. is during the dark, so that is the night. There is a unique caliber in this watch. It is only used in this model. It is a coaxial chronometer, Master Chronometer, anti-magnetic, shock-resistant, 60-hour power reserve, coaxial. It gives you all the toys you saw in the Constellation with the addition of all those you saw on this dial. Now, when you throw the watch on the wrist, it is 43 millimeters, which makes it fairly large for an Aqua Terra, but I haven't found any trouble wearing it on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. You can even see it's ducking under my cuff, even though it's not explicitly a dress watch. It can serve that purpose. This is a versatile watch, 50 millimeters lug to lug, so though it's broad and fairly thick, nevertheless, it does fit well on a smaller wrist, and it sits quite securely with a handsome and adjustable bracelet. All right, how about some high horology from very different corners of the Swiss upper end. This is philosophically as different from a Gondolo 5200 as you can get, with one exception, long power reserve. Launched in 2008, this is the Bethune DB22 power reserve, 48 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. It's actually only 11.2 millimeters thick, 52.2 millimeters lug to lug, screw down crown. This was the first Bethune sports watch, 200 meters water resistant, automatic winding, fully shock protected. It's a tough watch that is designed to be on your wrist full time. You can see polished steel and blued titanium for the hour and minute hands. There's a microlight concentric engraving, and it is a very shallow, subtle, and narrow engraving used to create an explosive pattern of light dancing over the microlight, which is a texture that is a signature of de Bethune dials. They make their cases, their dials, and their movements all in-house. They even own their own mini foundry. You can see that the screws used to fix the bezel to the case match those used to hold the chapter ring to the dial, and then there's wonderful dial depth right here with a power reserve indicator that transforms from red to blue as it fills up. Screw down crown, note the drilling profile on the crown, as well as the combination of satin finish and polish on the case. Roll it all over. Caliber 2024, you have a titanium fired blue rotor, and then you have a platinum mass outboard, and the effective lever arm is immense, making this one of the most efficient winders ever created. It pivots on ceramic bearings, and in order to brace the winding system with its long lever arm against shock, de Bethune patented a system of cantilever springs. You can see 4 of them arcing out over the center of the rotor with small rubies to prevent stiction or friction, sticking, that is, between the rotor and the spring. So this allows the winding system to be shock protected. You have a 6-day power reserve courtesy of 2 mainspring barrels, and then more patents down here. You have 1, 2, 3 shock protections springs for the balance bridge and the balance, Inca block for the balance staff, and then flanking triple parachute systems. This is also patented by de Bethune. The balance wheel is patented by de Bethune. It is a yoke, so it's not a wheel, it's a yoke. And it has horizontally opposed platinum masses in a titanium wheel with their own patented, once again, hairspring that has a dogleg kink fashioned to an inner curve. So it has 2 separate components that are fashioned together, bent in-house at de Bethune, beating concentrically like an overcoil without the shock susceptibility of an overcoil. This is a watch that is large, make no mistake, matching titanium buckle. And note that the profile of the buckle matches the profile of the lug. No detail left overlooked at de Bethune. The company, building a true rough and tumble sports watch in grade 5 titanium. It's lighter than steel and more scratch resistant. And though it's a huge watch at 48 millimeters, note how it's ducking under my cuff. So if you've got the wrist for this watch, you could easily wear it full time from one of the great brands in the business, having built less than 3,000 watches since 2002 and building 150 pieces or fewer per year. We are talking about absolute exclusivity from one of the best brands going, absolute integrity of style, engineering, materials, cost no expense, and while they've suffered for that at times, I also believe they deliver by far the best product for the best price, and they're absolute bargains pre-owned because you can pick this up right now for the marked up price of a used 2020 Rolex Submariner. Okay. Continuing with Patek Philippe, this is an underrated watch. It came out in 2013. The Gondolo 5200G is difficult to describe in terms of dimensions, but let's try. 32.5 millimeters from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock without the crown, and then about 46.5 millimeters end to end. When you throw it on your wrist, it wears a little bit bigger than that, though not much bigger, and there is a curvature to the case that helps to arc around your wrist. Let me see if I can pull my sleeve back a little bit here, and we will take a quick look at how it appears when it's actually cinched down. This is a watch that is arced a little bit like a Richard Mille. It's not quite a tonneau case. It's more of a cushion profile, and it's got a lovely double step to its profile. You can see that the shoulder itself has a step where the crystal slopes down and then has another outboard step. So it's a gorgeous watch. If it is somewhat misunderstood, I would say that's because there's a lot of love for the original 5100, and folks don't realize how convenient this watch is on a daily basis. With power reserve day and date, it gives you all the ready reference information you would want on a long power reserve daily driver. Now you can see on the reverse side of the case, it's gorgeous with a movement that is sized and shaped to suit the case. You can see the 2820 has a finger style drivetrain as you would find on a vintage pocket watch, and those individual fingers for the terminal end of the drivetrain lead to a free-sprung balance that helps the watch to maintain its power reserve by virtue of a relatively small diameter, but you'll note it's free-sprung, adjusted in a chronometer busting 6 positions. Remember, chronometers are adjusted and tested in 5 positions. This watch, featuring the Patek Philippe seal and a silicone hairspring, guaranteed, like the Nautilus we saw earlier, to run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds from the factory. You can also see that the level of finishing is surpassing, as there's big, broad and beautiful bevels across the bridges with the same treatment given to each jewel and screw countersink. Now the Côte de Genève, I'll do my best to capture them in the light. They are deep, sharply ridged, and as you can see, darker on one side and lighter on the other. That's the sign of abrasive wheel Côte de Genève as opposed to the stamped kind. And if you worry about stamped Côte de Genève in this price point, you're absolutely right, because not all companies have the integrity of Patek Philippe to do it the old school way with an abrasive wheel in striped form. There's engine turning on the base plate, and as you can see, all of the screw heads not just black polished, but with chamfered slots in circumference that you can pick up under high magnification. An 8-day manual wind power reserve and a date 8 in gray gold. Gray gold is a white alloy that never needs to be plated. It's solid straight through, so you can't scratch it and see a different color underneath. That's important, and Patek has been building with gray gold since approximately 2006. Okay, let's talk about big sports watches, starting with Breguet. The Type 21 arrived in 2004, and it was a bigger cousin to the smaller Type 20. 42 millimeters, this one in titanium wears like a more compact watch, and I think if you're going to buy a Type 21, going for titanium is probably the way to do it, as the timepiece wears more comfortable on an average-sized wrist. While it's big, it's not overpowering. The lug shape really helps here, as you can see that it is curved, and it's not a thin watch, but it's not as thick as the Breitling you're about to see. This is an aviator-style timepiece, but it is more luxurious than, for example, the 3800 or the 3820. There's a lot going on the dial, and I'll break it down for you in just a second. Just note that it's an all-subdued case, so it's anti-glare. The titanium and gray metal giving it a wonderful, elegant understatement despite its size. Now, there is a bidirectional rotating reference ring bezel, and you can see that the bezel allows me to line up with the syringe-style minute hand, and now I've got a 0 to 60-minute count-up timer. There is a wonderful system here whereby you have a radial indication of the chronograph minutes. So you've got your chronograph hours, you've got your constant seconds, you've got your chronograph seconds, you've got your 60 chronograph minutes, and so that is the minute hand, making it easier to read than a sub-register, but also giving you 30 more minutes, as most chronograph sub-registers are only 30 minutes. This one is 60. It's based on a Lemania 1350 architecture, which is one of the finest cam automatic chronographs ever made. What appears at first glance to be a GMT over at 3 o'clock is in fact a AM/PM indicator for the time at center, so you know whether you're looking at day or night, AM or PM. And as you can see right here, we are in the second half of the day, and we are slowly approaching midnight 24. Now, it is a flyback chronograph as well, so you push the trigger down at 4 o'clock, and it resets and it restarts. This is handy if you are flying with the watch, but again, I can't imagine anyone using this as a primary. It's more of a backup. It's also fun to have a chronograph that you can reset and restart if you're timing ground-bound activities such as track meets. Taking a quick look at the case back, though, it is a pilot's watch with 100-meter water resistance. You're going to be able to swim with this timepiece, and you're going to be able to swim without any real concerns. It's got a screw-down crown, far more aquatic than the typically 30 to 60-meter water-resistant pilot watch class. And if you look, this is my favorite detail. There are wonderful satin-finished applique metal numerals with handsome serifs used all the way around the dial. Let me see if I can do a loom shot right here. And now, as you can see, we are back with the Type 21. There's the luminescent pearl on the bezel, so you can read that ready reference even in the dark. Okay. Taking a quick look at the world of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, we have something that I have never seen before. This is the 25730 TT. It is primarily composed of blue-gray tantalum. So everything that is that almost purple-toned metal, that is tantalum. Everything that contrasts with it is steel. And you can see the white gold bezel bolts surrounding a petite tapisserie pantograph cut dial on a Royal Oak dual time. This is from the early 1990s, late D series, a watch that feels huge, but to the eye is compact. Nominally a 36mm watch. Like all Royal Oaks, it wears far larger than its nominal size. It's comfortable, but I would encourage you to think of this as a 38 or a 39 because of the broadness of the case and the integration of the bracelet. You will note, though, that it is quite thin and sits easily underneath the cuff. It is a lovely grayscale with the exotic tantalum metal, giving it also an undertone of blue, almost like slate. It's truly special and unlike anything else I've encountered. I knew these watches existed, but they're white whales. You come across them a handful of times in a career, and this is one of those times. Now, taking a quick look at the case back, it's fascinating because this one, in outstanding condition, features the AP Tantal, or tantalum, caseback stamp, but you'll also note that this is old school Royal Oak construction. So not only is this a tantalum case, but it's a tantalum case built in monoblock form, like the original Gerald-Genta design. That has been phased out today. Even on the Jumbo, the 15202 no longer uses the monoblock case construction. You can see there's a little slot adjacent to the crown. Because the case is built as one part, the dial as well as the movement, everything loads through the front, which is why there's a facing side slot for the crown. The crown actually slots down into its position as everything goes in through the front. Now you can see the hands as well as the indices are white gold, and there are 2 time zones. There's also a power reserve and a radial date. So this is a complicated watch that is built on a Jaeger-LeCoultre base movement, and the JLC 889 provides motive power. You can see that there is a second time zone. There is a power reserve indicator for the roughly 40-hour power reserve, and you can see as I manually wind the watch, it is an automatic, but as I manually wind the watch, the power reserve escalates toward the 38 to 40 hours of reserve. And let me see if I can find the intermediate setting position here. But the intermediate setting position allows me to change the time on that second dial. So I have the ability to read 2 independent time zones, and unlike the JLC version of this movement, I can actually change the date using the crown. The JLC uses a pusher adjuster. This movement, incidentally, is distantly related to the movement used in the Master Compressor Geographic. I will say this though, all in tantalum, this 36mm watch feels heavier than that 41.5 you just saw. Okay, big. That's the way to describe the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore chronograph. Rubens Barrichello 2, launched at the Istanbul Grand Prix back in 2006. This is the best of the 3. Titanium, rose gold, and platinum, and this is the platinum. 150 pieces. Imagery of motorsports everywhere. Platinum. You have a ceramic bezel to guard against scratches. You have automotive diffusers or maybe exhaust stacks sculpted in ceramic for the chronograph pushers. A center lock nut, much like you'd find at the center of a racing wheel in Formula One. That's your crown. You have bolts. Lug style, engine assembly, these hex bolts are all over modern race cars. And then you have a sort of vented disc profile on the edge of the bezel with intermediate plots joining the strap to the case, fashioned to look like the gas pedal or brake pedal, but we like to go, so they're gas pedals on an automobile. Rubens Barrichello, one of the great Brazilian race car drivers of all time. He's best known as the second banana to Michael Schumacher, but he was a winner and he was a champion in his own right. Not because he ever won the championship, though he was twice second, but because he was one of those indomitable figures who dominated a long period of F1 spanning decades. Still racing today in endurance sports cars, this is the symbol of Rubens Barrichello, and you can see a spoke-style case back. As this watch back from factory service is in outstanding condition, I will let you remove the sticker. JLC movement inside, it's an 889 base, but it's the upgraded free-sprung unidirectional winding 889, so this is known as the caliber 2326 with a 2840 Dubois de Praz vertical clutch chronograph module. Throw it on the wrist. Nominally a 42. This was actually, along with the Juan Pablo Montoya of 2004, the beginning of the 44mm Royal Oak Offshore. It is huge. Let me give you that down the barrel shot. It is a big, big, big watch. It is huge, and you can see that it's partly helped by the arc of the lugs, but I wouldn't recommend this watch for a wrist smaller than about 16 centimeters in circumference. I would not go smaller than my wrist if you're going to wear this one well. It is loomed, it is 100 meters water resistant, and it comes on this wonderful flexible rubber diver style strap with a matching platinum single folding buckle. If you want a big watch but you don't want to break the bank, well, Breitling is there for you with the Avenger Seawolf 45 with cobra yellow dial, 45 millimeters in diameter. You can see it features captive bezel construction with the bezel held on by screws, a triple knurled crown that screws down, 3,000 meter diving depth, little rider tabs on the bezel, which is a diving bezel, of course, making it easier to grip, and then there's a helium escape valve on the flank for you saturation divers. The strap, textile on the top with a contrasting stitch, calfskin on the bottom, and you get a deployant clasp here, which is uncommon on a diver, but it is nice to have, as this is a heavy and expensive watch. Objectively, it's still quite expensive. It's not a Timex. You will not want to drop it. 120 click bezel, easy to align with the minute hand, a real diving instrument. This is a timepiece that's probably not going to be your primary if you are a professional diver, but it's a fun backup alongside your dive timer. As with the AP, I recommend a bigger wrist than mine. Let's start with a 17 centimeter circumference wrist and up to wear this one well. Let's do a loom shot. All right, we're back with the Avenger Seawolf 45. That is a huge bezel pearl, and it makes for easy and ready reference when you are in the dark or submerged. Also note the seconds hand is loomed. That should be true of every dive watch. The Tag Heuer Monaco, but here we'll just call it the Heuer Monaco because Tag Heuer seems to have realized all the equity is in the Heuer name. So we have Heuer on the dial, Heuer on the crown, Heuer on the caseback, even Heuer on the buckle. And note the buckle, like the rest of the watch, is media blasted steel. This is a limited edition of 169 pieces. It was part of a series of 5 different watches, each in 169 pieces, launched for the 50th anniversary of the Monaco in 2019. Of the 5 pieces, this is the only one that featured media blasted steel, which gives it an upscale and subdued appearance compared to the polish and satin of the more common other 4. Those watches look relatively standard. This one looks special. It also has a lovely charcoal dial with a few well-chosen contrasts, red, silver, and applique indices, 39 millimeters, basically 39 millimeters square, though it's 47.5 millimeters lug to lug. You can see this watch honors the most recent decade of the Monaco watch, 2009 to 2019. Each of these special series watches, the 5 different ones, honored a different decade between 1969 and 2019. 40-hour power reserve, 100 meters water resistant. This one features a Sellita SW300 with a Dubois de Praz vertical clutch chronograph module, stop seconds, quick set date, again 100 meters water resistant, so it is a swimmable watch. You can see that the module has also been reversed somewhat in order to place, well, I should say the whole movement has been reversed in order to place the crown over at 9 o'clock like the original 1969 Monaco Caliber 11. This is officially the Monaco Caliber 11 limited edition. A lovely piece. Handsome, comfortable, and better built than the original. This is an all-the-time kind of watch. It's not too big for my wrist, but I wouldn't recommend it for a wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference. The 39mm Monaco wears like a much larger watch. That said, if you want something compact and traditional, go this route. Launched for 2014 in 400 pieces, this is the Patek Philippe 5975G, 40 millimeters by just over 10 millimeters thick in white gold. It is a triple scale flyback chronograph, and note that it only has a chronograph second. There are no other registers. No minutes, no hours, and why? Because it's a triple scale chronograph. Outboard, a telemeter scale for gauging distance. Inboard of that, Gradu pour 15 pulsations. It is a pulsation scale for doctors. You read against this scale and you count to 15 pulses after starting the chronograph, and then you stop it, and it gives you the beat per minute rate of your patient. Finally, you can see that there is a tachymeter scale which gives you the ability to gauge speed. So the telemeter is distance, the pulsation is beats per minute heart rate, and then the tachymeter is the speed of something like a car between the start and finish of a kilometer. You'll also note applique, but tiny, individual white gold indices, white gold hands at center, and it is a flyback chronograph, so you can rapidly restart and reset with one push of a trigger. The lug profile is extraordinarily strong, sculpted, stepped, mechanical. It has the tension and the overt mechanical character of the Italian futurist concept art of the first quarter of the 20th century. You can also see that it is remarkably comprehensive, with a dedication on the case back to 175 years of Patek Philippe and a special buckle built just for that year, just for these models, 1839 to 2014, 55-hour automatic winding power reserve, silicone hairspring, and free sprung inside. It uses the same caliber CH-28-520 as, for example, the 5960 and the Nautilus chronograph. An absolute stunner, and possibly one of the most imaginative, distinctive, memorable, and collectible of modern Patek Philippe limited editions. This is in white gold, 40 millimeters. Here's something you don't see too often. Chopard. The Chopard first striking watch, let's just call it that. It's not a minute repeater, but it is an hour striker. The first strike came out in 2006, and striking one in 40.5 millimeters, red gold, 100 pieces. You can see that it uses a version of the caliber 96, originally developed for Chopard by Michel Parmigiani in the 90s. This was the first Chopard manufacture movement, but it's been modified here to strike the hour with the black polished striker on the dial side. Now you have the ability to turn it on or off, and we'll listen to it. Turn it on. And you can hear it has a subtle effect. It is going to remind you of the hour, while at the same time keeping chronometer grade time. The first ever striking watch from Chopard led to later minute repeater, sonnerie watches, and elaborate evolutions of the striking complication. If you look at the dial, it's anything but standard, as we have a date sunken underneath a grill. So there is an upper polished rose gold grill with indices and radially rayed Roman numerals. You can see that there is a date, there's a constant seconds disc that sits down at 6 o'clock, and it has a lovely satin finished and beveled framework, so that little frame is actually part of the movement. The watch does feature guilloche, albeit an uncommon style, splaying out from an imaginary center point underneath the Roman numeral 12. It extends over the dial, which has incredible depth thanks to the grill. There's also a nickel anthracite coating on the guilloche center dial. Turn it all over. Micro rotor automatic 22 karat guilloche cut micro rotor, twin stacked barrels, 65-hour power reserve, stop seconds, overcoil hairspring, beautifully executed in the finest traditions of Chopard. This is a breathtaking movement in terms of the scope of its finish, its ambition, and its execution. You can see just how bright the anglage is and how broad. You can see the reflectivity of the black polished screw heads and black polished swan's neck regulator. And again, 100 pieces, 40.5 millimeters, easy to wear and fun to own as it's constantly nodding at you with its subtle strains of the gong and the resonator. A fun piece to own and proof that you don't need to chase brand names or hot models in order to have fun and own something approaching the best possible quality in the watch business. These Chopard, Louis Ulysse Chopard models are chronically underrated, and that's to your advantage. If you love what you see here, remember, reach out to tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.